December 27th. We've just had a hard freeze that lasted for several days, and the bees are all out taking cleansing flights now. It's in the 60s, and the most interesting part is how some of these bees are coming in completely covered in pollen because Jerry just filled the pollen feeders with artificial pollen. I don't see any dead bees, not one. So far they're making it through the winter. There's one that's covered in pollen. Another one. As you can see, I've got the entrances reduced on all of them. We did that when we fed them right before we left for Thanksgiving to protect them from the robber bees. After visiting with the bees, we went out to check on the pollen feeders and see if the bees were busy over there. And they're being quite orderly and peaceful in their pollen gathering. Pretty much ignoring me, going straight for the pollen. Now we turn the clock backwards 3 weeks to the 2nd of December, 2022. We left this pollen feeder here when we went off for family Thanksgiving. It's now December 2nd and the bees are definitely using it. And I peeked inside and saw, let's see if I can do this, that there is still quite a bit of pollen in there. You can see that yellow substance back in the cylinder. And you can see the bees happily gathering pollen from it. And I'm standing quite close to them and they're completely ignoring me. They're interested in the pollen only. This may be why the bees have not taken all the available pollen. We've got these daisies growing everywhere. They look a little bedraggled, but it also looks as if there are some fresh blooms. We had some very cold nights, cold for November in the hill country, but if it got down to freezing, it didn't stay that cold for long. And these hardy perennials may still be providing pollen for the bees. Now I'm going to check each of my colonies just to make sure that they're all going strong and to see if they've consumed all of the sugar nectar that I gave them just before Thanksgiving. At that point, we closed off all of the optional openings. The only opening they have now is this one entrance over on the far left. And we left them some ventilation. When it starts getting colder, we'll start putting more corks into those ventilation openings, and they're screened on the inside of the hive attics. So let's see what we find in here. And what I found in here is further evidence that they don't really need a lot of supplemental feeding yet. This is a top-hive feeder, the only one we have that's this rectangular format, because it takes about 2 gallons to fill it up, and the bees just don't use that quantity of nectar. This is our strongest hive. It's also our feistiest hive, but they usually, in the summer, they would have finished off the 2 gallons of nectar before the next hive inspection, certainly. So I'll have to get rid of this, and probably will not give them any more nectar for a couple of more weeks until the next time I peek inside. It's important to know the personality of your hive, and it's a little risky for me to take this hive attic off without giving them some smoke. So far they seem calm. I did put on my gloves. So what I plan to do is get rid of this feeder. I'll have to scrub it out, and the next time I feed them I'll use a much smaller top feeder with much less capacity. I hate wasting the sugar water like this. I had to restuff that, and the reason for this is not just to keep the drafts down, but also to keep the robber bees out as they get hungrier during the winter season. Still got lots of bees in here, but they are not being feisty at all. They don't seem to mind me a bit. So I'll button them back up and check out the rest of the colonies here. And we see that they have taken every drop from this smaller feeder. This feeder works in the nuke size hive box as well as in an 8 or a 10 frame hive box. So I'll refill this for them. There's a dead bee. A couple of dead bees. They may have been having some robbing up here. So I don't see any way that robbers could have gotten in. I'll keep my hands out and just go ahead and refill their feeder. They can deal with their own dead if they want to. And you can see that the bees are already coming up to get the nectar. So these girls had an abundance they didn't need. These girls are experiencing a little bit of scarcity, I'd say. So they're already coming up and sucking up that nectar. And when they realized I wasn't here to harm them, they let me clean out the top of their attic. It feels better not to be closing them up with dead bees. Same here in the to be or not to be. This is a larger version of the top feeder that you saw just over here with that yellow feeder, and it's larger but also empty. Has a couple of flies that I'll get rid of, and then I'll refill it. It's also gotten tipped down, so I'll fix that and refill that. We use these spacers under the feeder so that the bees can come and go and get good ventilation. This is important all year, and especially during the winter, that they can get good ventilation up through the feeder. And they also enjoy congregating up here in the hot summertime. It helps cool down the hive. Now, as you notice, this one is tipping because the little shim that I came up with, the little spacer, is not as deep as this one. So I will fix this, but I want to have smoke when I get into removing this feeder, because when I started moving it, you could hear them buzzing unhappily. So knowing what their attitude is today, how they're feeling, whether they're in a good mood or not. We have a cloudy day. It's been raining, and the rain is going to come back. So they're not in their very best humor. But look at how quickly they've come up here to feed on this nectar. Again, the feeder's a bit cattywampus, but that doesn't matter. They can still get the nectar, and as long as I make sure that this dome is well seated, we won't find any drowned bees when we come back to refill this. As you might have noticed, it was completely clear of bees when I opened it just a couple of minutes ago. So we'll close them up. I have all 3 of these colonies under a Klaus dome because we have had good luck with these domes in the winter time. And this colony is our newest one. It came from a split that we took in the summer, and it just never thrived. So it's got a new queen now. Looks as if they're doing all right. Let's see how they've done with their nectar. It's hard to tell with the glare there on the dome. So in this case, we use the attic, not for ventilation, but as a housing for the Klaus dome. With the dome, they get their ventilation coming up through the bottom of the hive and going back down at the sides. Sounds like the natives are getting a little bit restless, so I'll move on. It's still quite calm. So I say. It's okay, girls. It's all right. And they still have a good bit of nectar. And it has 1, 2, 3 dead ants in it. I am not going to worry about that. I'll just leave it just like it is. No sense in disturbing this nice equilibrium that we have, despite the dead ants. Dead ants. Dead ants, dead ants, dead ants, dead ants, dead ants. Generally, I use the Klaus domes for the weaker hives. This is a very strong hive. This is the balloon hive. And you can see the distribution of bees up here. Winter bees. And it looks from here as if, yes, this feeder's completely empty. We'll refill their top-hive feeder and move on quickly. Certainly is relaxing to work your bees on an early December day when it's kind of cozy and the bees seem pretty content. When I removed the dome, there was a bit of a buzz, but no bees roiling up and attacking me. So I think I'm going to be safe to go ahead and just refill this. It's nice and clean, no dead bees. So I want to leave this in exactly the position where it is, where it's nicely seated, but with room down there for the bees to get the nectar without coming out into the bottom of the top-hive feeder. These feeders hold half a gallon of nectar, and I only filled this one about half full. So I'll check it again in a couple of days. I've just made a new batch of nectar, and fill it up to the brim the next time I'm out here. It is important to make sure that this dome is well seated so the bees don't get out into the nectar and drown. This way they can come down, get a swig, climb back up, climb back inside the hive and store their nectar. And it keeps everybody safe. So I'll just put the lid on, close this hive back up. And this last active colony that we have here in Kerr County, these girls were a bit stronger than the ones down on the end through the summer, but they didn't really thrive. We'll be getting them a new queen. Assuming they make it through the winter, we'll be getting them a new queen in the spring. And here is yet another example of a top-hive feeder. And this is just a plastic bottle that has holes, a little circle of holes poked into it. I'm not going to disturb them because I can't refill it right now. I need to go and get my fresh nectar once it cools down. But when I do come back and feed them, I'll show you how it works. I'm pretty sure that this bottle will be empty. Beat it, fly. It is about 2 weeks later, And we've got a beautiful blue sky day. It's warm, so I decided to check in on the bees and see how they're doing and give them some additional syrup, sugar water. And all three of these large colonies had totally emptied their supply of sugar water, so I've already replenished them. It's good for them to get their stores of carbohydrate in before the really cold weather comes in. The pollen feeders have been emptied once, and I've refilled those, so they're definitely taking the supplemental food, preparing for the winter. And these girls are just going to ignore me, which is a good sign. Completely empty, fair amount of propolis, and you can see the very small holes that serve to deliver the sugar nectar to the bees. So we'll fill each of these, the feeders in each of these, and call it a day. So far the bees have been pretty docile. You can see now that I put the bottle back down, the girls are very interested in it. They're coming up from deep inside their hive box, and they're starting to gather the nectar. These will be winter bees. This queen had a little bit of a complete lack of laying during the hot, very hot, dry summer that we had, but she got revved back up, and we're getting to have a little bit more respectable bunch of winter bees. I hope this trip backwards in time has helped, as we looked first at the bees that had come through the Christmas freeze in really good shape, and the weeks preceding that as we prepared for the cold weather that would predictably occur sometime in late December or sometime in January or sometime in February. The idea being just to be prepared and make sure that the bees had plenty of stores of carbohydrates in their sugar nectar and protein in the available pollen source. God bless y'all. I hope you have a cozy, happy, safe winter.